We're currently living through the messy end of a paradigm that has structured our politics and our economics for the best part of 40 years, and simultaneously through a struggle, as yet unresolved, over what will replace it. The drama engulfing us right now isn't some mystifying, irrational outbreak of madness on the part of politicians or indeed voters. It's the product of a deeper crisis, a crisis of late capitalism, of a particular ideology and orthodoxy that has shaped Britain since the late 1970s and which fractured under the weight of its own contradictions in 2008. Brexit, Corbyn, Johnson, these shocks and surprises matter a great deal, but they are symptoms of this deeper crisis, not causes. And we will not meaningfully address that deeper crisis by obsessing over their daily twists and turns. This isn't all an administrative mistake or a ghastly dream. There is no redemptive liberal saviour waiting in the wings who will magically turn the clock back to an illusory golden age of centrist technocracy when life was calm and sensible and predictable. The foundations upon which that kind of politics was constructed have crumbled. The battle now is over what sort of country we will build from the ruins. And with that in mind, I really try to do three things. Firstly, I argue that to make sense of what we're going through, we need to shift our gaze. For too many journalists and pundits, politics appears to be something that exists solely within the SW1A postcode, among the parties and the personalities and the parlour games of Westminster, and more so now than ever as Westminster's traditional structures implode. Since the financial crisis, fundamental shifts have been taking place in the ways we live, the ways we work, the distribution of power and autonomy between us, and the stories we tell about the systems that govern us and about ourselves. But until recently, although governments came and went from Gordon Brown to the coalition to a Tory majority, despite all of those formal mutations, the grammar and syntax of institutional power in this country remained the same, as did the lens through which, by and large, the press evaluated and reported it. And you can find a parallel to this in the American South of the late 1930s and 40s, when legions of baseball correspondents filed dutiful and scrupulously balanced reports detailing the highlights of each match, the transfers from one team to another, the internal dramas that formed the backbone of every season. And with very few exceptions, none of them ever commented on the fact that at that time, US baseball leagues were racially segregated, or that the informal baseball colour line was being progressively undermined by a nascent civil rights movement that would go on to transform the country's history. The correspondents operated within the boundaries of the system they reported under, and rarely questioned its underlying structure or the wider social forces that were rendering it an anachronism. Now, albeit in a very different context, something similar, I think, has happened in Britain. A massive category error that resulted in most of our political class completely missing the bigger picture. That disconnect between institutional politics and politics as experienced on the ground explains why, when the former finally caught up with the latter and our electoral landscape began erupting, so many political experts, the ones we rely upon to interpret and analyse the political terrain on our behalf, were left confounded. It also explains why, for all the noise and fireworks and breathless 24-hour rolling news coverage emanating now out of Parliament and Downing Street, viewers and readers rarely come away with any clearer idea of how all this fragmentation and uncertainty at the top is linked with the changes they've experienced in their lives and witnessed in their own communities. Any clearer idea of how it's enmeshed with the turmoil below. So, over the past couple of years, as most reporters were flocking towards Westminster to understand why things are falling apart, I've been heading the other way. I ended up sitting in franchised coffee outlets and nondescript office blocks up and down the country, climbing over construction sites and factory ruins, wedging myself into basements and squats and the shadows of glitzy conference halls, spending time with people who, far from being anti-politics, which is often the term used to describe popular sentiment in Britain today, are actually fiercely political. but whose energies are being channeled into movements and spaces that simply aren't on the radar of lobby correspondents at Westminster. And so the second thing is bring some of those remarkable new political mobilizations into the light, from teenagers holding their own radical grassroots education courses, to new unions of private renters taking on landlords in the street, to insurgent labour movements led by those on the front line of low-pay Britain, and to interrogate the disturbances that these new political mobilisations are causing, disturbances that will have a profound impact on us all. And finally, and appropriately, I think, given that it has grown out of the collapse of an ideology that sought to detach great swathes of life from politics, to reconceptualise us all as political agents, capable of collectively determining our own futures in this moment when the kaleidoscope has thrown all the pieces up in the air, rather than consigning ourselves to a bit part role in somebody else's. And most importantly, for me at least, alternative forms of politics are beginning to materialise. I hope that all sounds interesting, but I hope more than anything else, actually, that it does justice to a quote from one of my favourite writers, Rebecca Solnit, who said of our current era, "The future is dark, but with a darkness as much of the womb as of the grave."